All right, so let's talk a little bit about the advertising decisions covered in Chapter 18 in your book. They talked about different kinds of advertising. They talked about pioneering advertising. That, of course, would be at the introduction stages of a new product. And then they talked about competitive advertising, which would be done as you start to generate selective demand and you have lots of competition. Remember, though, that all product advertisements are focused on three basic goals: build awareness, persuade, and remind. All right, so developing an advertising program. Remember, we already talked about identifying the target market, specifying the advertising objective, setting the advertising budget. Now what? Well, now let's talk a little bit about designing the actual message. Of course, this is the creative aspect of marketing, and this is the part that everybody thinks that they're very good at. Turns out that being creative is much more difficult than you might originally think. All right, so when I decide on a trying to determine what the message should be for my particular product, the very first thing I need to go back to is my target audience. I want to make sure that the message that I generate is a message that creates a desire for the product, creates some sense of exclusivity for the product, and is believable. So I need a message that creates desire, is exclusive, and believable. So designing the message, all right? And so when I design the message, there are four areas of message design that need to be considered: content, appeal, message structure, and message source. So when we talk about content, the question is, what really needs to be communicated? Is there information that needs to be communicated? Do I need to compare my brand to another brand? Is it a positioning information that needs to be communicated? Is it lifestyle, etc.? So when I think about the content, I ask myself, how do I want people to be different after they get done viewing the message or listening to the message or seeing the message or being immersed in the message? Next on the list is appeal. Of course, we're familiar with humor appeals, fear appeals, logic appeals, guilt and shame appeals, and moral appeals. Of course, humor appeals we see all the time in marketing. This is when a lot of the advertisements now for insurance are humorous. Progressive and Geico and a number of those companies now do try to do humor appeals. Humor appeals often work in a cluttered marketing environment, but they do have the disadvantage of wearing out relatively quickly. Fear appeals work very well. Fear appeals are designed to create a level of anxiety or fear and then suggest that your product is the one that would remove that fear. A logical appeal is one where I try to appeal to you from a logical perspective. These are appeals that typically have numbers and comparisons of alternatives where the total cost. And so this is an appeal where I try to logically get you to understand why you should buy my product. The fourth appeal is called guilt and shame. It's one of our favorite appeals. This is the idea where I try to guilt you or shame you into doing something. Your children try to do this with their adults all the time when they suggest, for instance, that, why do you need a new car? Well, I need a car because Billy got a new car and Sarah got a new car. And all the other parents have doing that. And so there's this idea of using a guilt or shame approach as an appeal. And then finally, there's a moral appeal. That is, it's the right thing to do. All right, and there are other appeals, but these are the five that we see most often in advertising. Structure, there are a couple of structure issues. There are four structure issues. Let's start with the first two. The first one is conclusion drawing. Should I draw the conclusion for the customer or let them draw their own conclusion? In other words, should I say, you need to do this, this is the best product, or should I let the customers draw their own conclusion? Well, in general, it's always thought that it's best to let the customer draw their own conclusions if they are both willing and able to. That is, if they have enough information and are smart enough to do that, then you want them to draw their own conclusions, and if they are in fact willing to put the effort in to do that. On the other hand, if they're not, then you want to go ahead, especially for low involvement items, you might want a conclusion draw for them. Should you present one or two-sided arguments? That is, in here is the order of presentation. If I'm going to present my arguments compared to someone else's arguments, which is the order of presentation? So in one instance, there is a primacy effect. This is the benefit of when the idea behind a primacy effect is when information is presented relatively quickly or it's a high involvement situation, I might want to make my arguments first. Recency effects work better, and this recency effect is the benefit of going last. A recency effect has to do with low involvement situations and a long time between presentations where people forgot what the primacy issue was in the first place. So do I want to go first or second in terms of making my arguments? The answer is what? Well, I want to go first when there's a relatively short window in terms of the time that all the information is presented, and if it's high involvement. If it's low involvement and it's a long drawn out process, I'd rather go last. Recency effects. Message source and spokesperson. Well, who should deliver the message? Well, we want a spokesperson who is credible, likable, and potentially knowledgeable. And so I want a spokesperson who I believe would not lie for this particular product. I want someone who I like and is likable, and I want someone who is knowledgeable. And so if you think about the number of people, we often use sports figures, movie stars, a number of interesting spokespeople. But of course, that even an ad like Motel 6 uses Tom Burdette. So who should be delivering my message? Well, hopefully someone credible, likable, and knowledgeable. So having the right message is critical for the target audience if you want to be successful.